Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we're going to be diving into episodes 311 through 313, which will cover manga chapters 429 through 431. And again, I apologize, I've lost my voice because of the Mariners. They have advanced the American League Division Series, and so I went pretty crazy the day before recording this, so my voice is a little shot at the moment, but please bear with me and thank you. So yeah, now with the battle won and the Mary there to save them, they need to escape and get safely back to Water 7. And so this is going to be a slightly longer podcast. This is a pretty special set of episodes, so let's get right into it. Starting off with the synopsis, the Mary has now arrived to save them all and take them home, but they need to first escape the Buster Call and get out of the Enies Lobby before they can celebrate. But along the way, they do suffer a casualty and need to say a heartbreaking goodbye before they reach Water 7 to rest and regroup. Alright, so differences. There are a couple differences. First off, the added scene initially when they board the Mary, there's a scene of the rope ladder dropping itself. Now that's just an anime only thing, which is a little weird, and I'll kind of mention it later on in the actual thoughts section. Another added scene that they have while aboard the Mary is this one I really do like the inclusion of is Chopper putting Zoro into sort of that leg hold and waiting for him to yield. And I just love that scene because of the dialogue where Sanji's like, give up? And Zoro's like, no, no, in like this kind of Japanese accent. It's pretty funny. And then in the anime, this one's kind of brutal. So when Robin goes for that final clutch on Spandam as they're sailing away. In the anime, they actually show a silhouette of Spandam's spine just like snapping in half, which is not in the manga. I mean, you assume that that's what's happening, but the fact that they show the silhouette of the spine just like crack is pretty intense. I mean, it's played kind of for laughs and for seriousness as well, but it is an interesting addition. There's also a couple extra scenes of Nami kind of looking around the Mary, especially inside the cabin, to see if anyone is actually on the ship because they're all wondering how the Mary is here by itself. We also get a flashback to when Frankie first explains the legend of the Klabauter Man to Usopp back in Tom's workshop, which is not in the manga as well. And that's just more to kind of catch everyone up who's sort of watching week to week on the concept of the Klabauter Man. And then also, when Frankie is back at Water 7 telling the story of Adam, we get a couple more extra scenes inserted into his sort of story about the Adam tree. And then finally, the last difference I noticed was when Zoro is sort of lost trying to get back to the Galila company after discovering the Marines are headed towards them. He's on the coast and he sort of tried a couple thugs are trying to attack him, which obviously never goes well for those people. And so that scene wasn't in the manga. In the manga, it's just Zoro kind of getting lost a couple times, just like it's shown in the anime. But then I don't know why they added, because this doesn't really lead to anything, so I don't know why they added this. But those are all the differences I found, so let's get into my thoughts. So yeah, jumping right back in where we left off on that emotional ending to the last episode, of Mary showing up to rescue them. They manage to get aboard, but something is strange to everyone as there's no one on board, and even the rope ladder comes down on its own, like someone threw it, but there was no one there. I and most people knew that this was the Mary itself doing this, especially after being told the whole story about the Klabauter Man. But there's still a possibility that one could think that the Mary came because it was being sailed by an actual person. Now, the only person who would really be capable and have a reason to do that was probably Iceberg, who was still on Water 7 with the Mary. But I think for myself and for most everyone, it was pretty clear that the Mary itself came, especially with how it was talking to them earlier. It's interesting they added that little scene of the ladder dropping by itself in the anime to make it look like someone was on board and to make you kind of doubt for a split second, but I just feel like that was unnecessary. I don't know why that was added. But before they have any time to really think about it, they still need to escape Enies Lobby and the Buster Call. And again, it's awesome seeing the equal sort of power structure of the Straw Hats as they now that they're on the ship, Zoro defers the lead to Nami and asks her for instructions, which I never tire of seeing sort of the power dynamics of the Straw Hats, where whoever has the expertise gets to lead. If it's a medical situation, Chopper's in the lead. If it's more strategic, Sanji, and obviously if it's more battle oriented, Zoro. And then when they're on the ship, it's Nami. Like, they all have like their strengths, and whenever those strengths need to shine, no one is really above, their ego, and they just let the others handle it. The next, we get a really sweet moment with Robin as Luffy tries to thank her for saving his life, but she stops him, as to her, she owes them a great deal of debt of gratitude for saving her. But Zoro, being a pragmatic guy, tells everyone rather coldly that they don't have time for any of that right now and they need to get moving. Sanji and Chopper get offended by the sort of the callousness of Zoro and playfully attack him, to the point where Chopper, once he realizes that he can move again, puts him in a leg hold. And I mentioned this because I always find it really funny, like I said in the different section, when Sanji asks, "Give up?" and Zoro just yells, "No, no," in English. It's pretty funny. But back to reality though, Spandam, not wanting to lose, he just says F it and orders everyone to shoot to kill regardless of Robin's life, on false orders from Aokiji that Spandam just sort of makes up at the moment. The ship begins to aim and fire, but something weird happens as all their aim starts to slip, and before they know it, the whirlpools that were originally there back when the Buster Call originally initiated, which means the gates of justice are closed again, or beginning to close, but you're wondering how. But I mean, I knew what was really happening, and I think most people realized what was happening too if they were paying attention. But who else but the secret agent Sanji? Sanji coming up clutch again in the background in the most unexpected and sneakiest of ways. Always ever the strategist of the crew, thinking several steps ahead. Turns out what he was doing when he disappeared during the battle earlier was that he went to the control room to begin closing the gates of justice. And seriously though, the amount of trust Sanji displays at the time was also really cool, as he knew that they'd be fighting that many Marines at the same time without him, but also the belief in Nami's navigation abilities through the whirlpools. Like, he not only trusted them to be able to hold out without him, but also once the whirlpools appeared, he knew that Nami could get them through that. And yeah, I love the crew dynamics displayed here throughout these scenes. And they now just have to survive the cannon fire as Nami works out how to get out of there. And another one of the more famous memed moments in One Piece is how Luffy wants to help defend the Mary, but can't move yet. So Sanji and Zoro decide to use Luffy as sort of a deflector to catch the incoming cannons and fling them back. Is freaking hilarious. But the funniest part is Usopp calling them devils, with Zoro, Sanji, and Luffy all just throwing up peace signs with these like innocent faces. And it's classic. And that shot of them all with these like blank stares and the peace signs is just memed to hell. And I will say though, in the manga, this moment gets better, because this moment in the anime is sort of drawn with Usopp and the three of them kind of like side by side with sort of a distortion. But in the manga, it's much better, as it's a clear focus and centers them in the frame because it's a thin panel. And you can see their faces much better, and it's pretty awesome. Anyways, as they're escaping, Robin gets one last bit of much-needed retribution for all the terrible and horrible things that Spandam does, and you still see some of the dark side that Robin has in her as she goes all out and does one final clutch on him. And in the anime, like I mentioned in the differences section, they added that brutal shot of his spine just breaking clean in half. Like, jeez. And he should be dead, or at the very least paralyzed after that. With Nami's calculations, though, ready, she has Frankie use his coup de burst to launch the entire ship out of the area past the whirlpools, with Usopp following up with a massive smoke screen to cover their asses. And while this is cool, I don't know how this actually works, because how is Frankie sort of mounting himself to the Mary? Like, if he does that, is he like holding on to the bow of, or the stern of the Mary? and then shooting. Because in the anime, it looks like he's using both hands. So what's actually keeping him attached to the Mary? It's just like, shouldn't he just go flying back into the cabin? I don't know. It's a cool moment, but it doesn't make any like sense in terms of physics. Meanwhile, Polly has stolen back the puffing Tom, which is really cool, and they use that to escape as well. With both parties successfully escaping and witnessing what has happened, Aokiji surprisingly is there to order the Buster Cult to stand down and declare that this is a complete defeat for the Marines and the world government. Now that they're all safe, Kokoro helps Luffy up to his special spot on the figurehead, which is a really sweet moment, as Luffy declares they are the victors with the instrumental version of We Are going on in the background, and it's enough to give anyone goosebumps. And yeah, this is it. They've won. I almost said we, but yeah, they've won. And just like on Long Ring Long Land, Aokiji seems to have a bit of a soft spot for the Straw Hats, as he again basically lets the Straw Hats go, kind of adding to that line of thinking that Aokiji is not like the other Marines in the sense that he does have his own sense of justice. It'll definitely be something interesting to keep watching as to what he'll do or what he'll become. Will he be kind of like a smoker type of Marine, or maybe even friendlier with like Kobe? Who knows? But yeah, that is a incredible conclusion to the Enies Lobby arc. But here we go, episode 312. Are you all ready to ugly cry? Because this one is a doozy. First off, one thing you'll notice is the dramatic shift in art style in this episode compared to the last episode, which used the more thinner, flatter, and more fluid-like animation of movie 6, The Baron, Omatsuri, and the Secret Island, whereas episode 312 uses the more angular, harder lines with the exaggerated proportions and kind of that shiny aesthetic of movie 7, The Giant Mechanical Soldier of Karakuri Castle. I like both, but one thing I don't like about the episode 312's art style is just how exaggerated they make the female characters' breasts and proportions. Like, Nami and Robin's breasts have been progressively getting larger as the series goes due to what Oda attributes as they're just growing and maturing as people, which okay. But this episode and movie 7 take it to a whole other level. They are massive to the point where it's very distracting. And they even add unnecessary shots of them, like when Nami is checking the cabin to see if anyone is there. They just have her unnaturally like bending over to show as much cleavage as possible, and it's just too much. Like, let's cool it on the fan service, please. But anyways, let's get to the actual stuff. We start with a pretty funny moment that begins with Luffy looking for Usopp, because now that the conflict is over, Usopp is still embarrassed to be with them, so he puts his Sogeking mask back on. Luffy and Chopper are now wondering where Usopp has gone, with Sogeking telling them that Usopp took a small boat and went ahead, which is absolutely absurd, but they believe it anyways, and Zoro does this little comment rhetorically asking them what exactly do they recognize as Usopp, which is pretty funny. I also like the little detail that Chopper for once is carrying someone around, since Luffy is still too exhausted and injured to move, where normally Chopper is sitting on someone else's head, probably Zoro's. But what's funny is he's using his brain point instead of his heavy point, which you'd think would be easier to carry somebody. However, it isn't before long Iceberg and what can only be assumed is the entirety of the Galila company have come to rescue and meet them. But Iceberg has got a very stern-looking expression on his face, but that quickly turns to a smile after processing what they actually just accomplished. However, something tragic really happens here, and the Mary splits in half. Like, it's pretty shocking when that happened, when I saw that for the first time. The damage has finally caught up to the Mary, and the moment that Iceberg and all the shipwrights have been warning them about has unfortunately come to pass. It came as a shock to some of them, but it was also something that was sadly inevitable, as Sanji points out. But to us, no less shocking. It's especially hard hearing Luffy pleading to Iceberg to help save the Mary. And it's an important nakama that, but then with a stern look, Iceberg delivers the line that sends our hearts into our stomachs. He finally says, then let them finally rest. And this blank stare comes over Luffy, similar to the one that probably came across mine and most of your faces as well. Iceberg then goes on to say that he's already done all that he could, as we get a flashback on Water 7 of the events that led to the Mary miraculously being there in the first place. After the Aqua Laguna, Iceberg hears a wooden hammer pounding in the scrap heap, which we can assume is the Clubouter Man again trying to repair the Mary or itself. Iceberg is then drawn to it and finds the Mary in a really rough state after being dropped and hit with the Aqua Laguna. But then Mary speaks to Iceberg and says, "It wants to sail. I want to sail one more time." And oh my god, I'm already tearing up at this point. And the Mary knows that its Nakama are in trouble and are going to need it and desperately wants to be there for them one last time and begs Iceberg to help it. This is such a touching moment, seeing Iceberg give it his all and work so hard to fix Mary up as best he can, even though he's not even sure why he's doing it, because to him, it was a ludicrous idea to fix a ship that was already on death's doorstep with no one even around to actually sail it. But he does it anyways, because the Mary reached out and asked him to. Again, how can you not be romantic about the sense of loyalty from Mary and the selflessness or the selfless kindness from Iceberg? Another reason why Iceberg will forever be one of my favorite supporting characters in this entire series is because of this moment. When he's completed his repairs, Mary once again speaks again to Iceberg's shock, as Mary tells him thank you, and then miraculously sets sail with a wave just kind of crashing over them, and off to the Enies Lobby he goes. And he even mentions how it's a miracle that he's even seeing this right now, and that Mary is one of the most amazing pirate ships he's ever seen in his life. Hearing that, Luffy finally makes the horribly tough decision to say goodbye to Mary. With that, Luffy and the crew prepare for the Going Mary's funeral and send it off properly. And I was not emotionally ready for this when I first read this for the first time. And this whole scene caught me completely off guard in terms of how it would hit me. Luffy's message about how the seafloor is a dark and lonely place really hit me, because it really is a scary place. But they're going to see it through to the end together. With that, Luffy begins to light Mary up and mentions how it was probably a good thing that Usopp isn't there, since he'd never be able to handle this. And what up until now has been kind of a joke/gag turns out to be an incredibly heartbreaking but touching aspect of the whole Luffy not knowing Usopp is Sogeking. But Zoro, who's standing next to Usopp, asks him what he thinks about that, and Sogeking/Usopp has finally come to terms with saying goodbye to, the Going Mary, and says a pretty cool statement about how this is a man's parting. There shouldn't be any tears shed, which most of us will not be able to hold to, neither can he. And I think what really helped Usopp is that he realizes that the Mary itself is ready to go as well, as he states. As Luffy says thank you, it starts to snow, and dear friends, the ending theme from a little while ago starts to play over a montage of all of Mary's greatest moments, as well as moments from each member's perspective. At this point, I don't know about you, but I'm a mess every time I either watch or read this. And I'm kind of tearing up right now. Um, and I love that they took the time to reanimate all these classic moments, and they even took care to stay close to the art style from the earlier animation, where the characters' designs are much more simpler and more rounded. And I love seeing all these classic moments like the Dream Barrel moment and Mary flying to the Skypiea and Reversed Mountain. I mean, they're all such amazing moments. Seeing them reanimated in this sort of HD style is incredible. And seeing how important and significant Mary was to everyone and their success up till now is really highlighted here. And without the Mary, you don't have the Straw Hats. And also seeing Chopper just an absolute wreck is really tough as well, as he's still a young kid and hasn't really experienced a loss like this since Hero. Once the montage is over, though, that's really where it gets to a point where if you're a human, you're going to be in tears. And I remember when I first read the rest of this, I kind of ruined my manga tankobon because tears just kept falling onto the page. And if I go back to my copy, it's still kind of like a little bit warped because of the tears. It's kind of weird. Um, but yeah, as everyone watches, Mary begins to speak, and it apologizes to them that they're sorry that they couldn't take them further, and this is too much for Nami as she drops to her knees, and Chopper falls apart as well. Not only that, but now everyone else can hear Mary too, in addition to the Straw Hats. And it's so hard hearing Luffy desperately apologizing to Mary for all the harsh things he's done to it, as well as Zoro and Sanji's stupid roughhousing and Usopp's terrible repair jobs. It's hard, but really amazing how vulnerable Luffy is, here. You think with how crazy he's been with Mary, just callously ripping off the mask during his duel with Laboon, but he's grown and realizes what he did and has come to see that that was wrong and is incredibly remorseful about all of that. And that's a side of Luffy that I didn't think I would ever actually see. And it's a really cool character moment for Luffy as well. Then you see Usopp desperately trying and failing at his man's farewell as he's crying like crazy under his mask, and you can see just the tears flowing over his scarf and his cape. Then you hear Mary's final farewell as it says, despite all the hardships, it was incredibly happy sailing with the Straw Hats and thanks them for taking such good care and holding it so dear. And ending with just the most heartbreaking scream from Luffy that Maddie was just, incredible acting, but it's so hard. And yeah, as heartbreaking as this whole sequence was, it was an incredibly beautiful and very touching send-off for the first fallen Straw Hat Nakama. Honestly, this is One Piece at its best. To make you care this much for a boat is just incredible storytelling by Oda. Also, we need to give credit to Hoko Kuwashima, the voice actor that plays Mary slash the club outer man. With a few lines that she got, she killed it. She managed to sort of infuse that innocence and gratitude in Mary's voice while also still keeping it somber with just that perfect balance, and it was just an amazing performance. And amazing work by all the voice actors as well as the animators and crew on this such important and significant episode. It's definitely one of the quintessential One Piece moments in the entire series, and it still is to this day. I mean, they all deserve a pat on the back for how amazingly well done this episode was, because it deserved it and needed it. It was a very important episode, the first death of a Straw Hat, and they handled it perfectly. Oh, and one last side note. I'm sure some of you have noticed that when it comes to the pronouns that I've been using for Mary has mostly been pretty neutral or gender neutral by using things like it and they instead of the more commonly used she that's used in most of the translations and traditionally what we in the West use to identify ships and vehicles. But with Mary specifically in Japanese, the Going Merry refers to themselves as boku. And on two separate occasions, once during Skypiea, during that scene where Usopp sees the Club Outer Man for the first time, then again at the very end here, when they say sailing with the Straw Hats has made them very happy, it specifically uses boku wa shiawase deshita, or I was very happy. And the word boku is generally what a young boy or male would refer to themselves, unlike a girl or female would use the pronoun atashi. Not to be confused as watashi, which is sort of a gender-neutral pronoun. And it gets a little confusing, I know. But long story short, I decided to use the neutral pronoun since having myself grown up in America, it's weird to refer to a ship as anything other than a she. So I just went with a neutral thing because in Japanese, it makes it seem like the Mary is actually a boy based on how it's using the pronoun boku. Anyways, with that though, we move ahead 2 days later with everyone back on Water 7, and the first thing we see is Zoro contemplating the loss of Yubashiri, which again is a big deal. Which we assume Zoro at some point will purchase a new sword, maybe somewhere on Water 7, but this is kind of like cast aside, but yeah, Zoro right now only has 2 swords, and things are getting kind of back to normal in Water 7 with the town and the Galila company working to repair the damage from the Aqua Laguna. And during all this, Usopp is hanging out with Oimo and Kashi. And, since he can't necessarily go back to the Straw Hats, even though he probably could, but yeah, he's still kind of ashamed to go back. But the crazy thing is he's actually offered an invitation to Elbaf with the two giants. And this is a pretty significant offer for Usopp, as this is one of Usopp's sort of overarching goals, to visit Elbaf one day as a brave warrior of the sea. But here, Usopp actually hesitates because at the moment, at least the way I see this, is that he still has unresolved issues with Luffy and the crew, obviously. But I also think that after what happened between them, maybe he feels a little unworthy to visit such a place like Elbaf at the current state he is in. But the next scene with Iceberg and Frankie is really cool. And it's one that I enjoy more the more I rewatch this than I have, I guess, than previous rewatches. I'm not sure I can articulate why exactly, but it's just nice seeing these two getting along again. But what's even cooler is that Iceberg is already designing a way that can save Water 7 once again. This time, not from economic hardships like Tom did, but from environmental hardships from the Aqua Laguna by converting the entirety of Water 7 into a floating island, which is insane. But again, that's what One Piece is all about. People making impossible and insane things possible for the betterment of all people. This inspires Frankie to come up with one of his own ideas to fulfill the other side of what Tom did to change the world. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But just then, he's informed about the items that he bought with the stolen 200 million berries from the Straw Hats has finally arrived. But before we get to find out what either of these things are, we catch back up with everyone else, and the first thing we see is Luffy miraculously sleep eating. This whole scene, of course, reminds us of the similar moment after the Arabasta fights, where Luffy does the instant eating magic trick, which is still one of my favorite jokes, by the way. But when asked about the log, the camera cuts to Nami, who's in utter despondency to the point where the color is drained of the corner of her room, which is hilarious. And even Akemi Okumura's performance is hilarious here, as her, like, she has like a lower register in her voice for Nami, which we've never heard before. And it rounds out this joke perfectly. The reason she's depressed is that all their stuff, including the remaining money and her precious tangerine trees, were all supposedly washed away by the Aqua Laguna, but this obviously isn't what actually happens, as all the stuff is immediately brought back when it's revealed the citizens of Water 7 seized all that stuff when they still thought the Straw Hats were suspected murderers, which brings much joy and color back to Nami, which is a fun gag, I think. And then Frankie suddenly comes bursting in with it ass first, with Kiwi and Mose with a little folk tale and a request/offer. He first tells them a story of an island that has a near indestructible giant tree that can withstand wars and anything, eventually having a city built around it. And again, there are only a few trees such as this in existence, a treasure tree referred to as Adam. It turns out that Frankie has been after this wood, but's been unable to get it since it rarely shows up on the black market, and when it does, it costs an exorbitant 200 million berries. But this time, he managed to steal the money he needed from a certain little pirate crew. So it turns out that what Frankie ended up buying with the money he stole from Usopp was this Adam tree wood. And a note about the Adam tree, this most likely is a reference to the Adam and Eve story and the Tree of Knowledge from the biblical story. And this is also confirmed a little further on down the line in the story, actually a lot further down the line in the story, with a little tidbit of info much later. I'll quickly mention this in the spoiler section later, but also I can't help but notice in the scenes from Frankie's story that the rebuilt city around the tree looks a lot like Ohara and the Tree of Omniscience, which is the Tree of Knowledge. And, it was a literal tree filled with knowledge, i.e. books and research, which is an interesting parallel between, again, Frankie and Robin, which is pretty cool. Now, bear in mind, this imagery is not actually shown in the manga. I forgot to mention this in more detail in the differences section, but the imagery that we see here in the anime is strictly just for the anime. And so I don't know if Oda actually meant the Ohara's sort of Tree of Omniscience to be sort of possibly a source of the Adam wood. But yeah, I don't know that that's ever been confirmed. But another inspiration for this tree could be from a real-life giant tree also called the Adam tree, located in California here in the US in Mountain Grove Home. And according to Wikipedia, it is the 21st largest giant sequoia tree in the world. So I think it draws from both of these inspirations because obviously it's a giant tree. Now, at this point, the Straw Hats are getting a little bit impatient, but Frankie cuts them off firmly. And this part you can't help but get really emotional about after learning all we have about Frankie and what he's gone through. Not to mention the incredible music score that accompanies this part of the story. As we've never heard this track, I think, up until now, and it's a super inspirational track. I really like this one. But, anyways, he expresses how he once vowed to never build ships again, obviously referring to sort of his role in having Spandam use the ships to frame Tom. But I'm speculating here that after just hearing how Iceberg was inspired by Tom to save Water 7, and the news about the Atomwood arriving gave Frankie the inspiration to go after his goals once more. Even after all this time, he never could truly give it up, as he's been working on a blueprint for a ship, and not just any ship, a dream ship that can overcome any ocean. And there we have it. It's Frankie's dream. He's finally checked all the boxes to become a Straw Hat, and we have a dream, folks. Just as Tom had built the Oro Jackson for Roger, Frankie wants to build the next Pirate King's ship that will sail all the oceans and reach the ends of the seas. He then asks that when the ship is built, will the Straw Hats set sail on that ship? And yeah, this is so awesome. The Straw Hats are about to get a ship better than they could have ever imagined. I mean, this moment is so exciting, and there's something about how genuinely sincere and the normally over-the-top Frankie is. He's truly fallen in love with the Straw Hats and wants to entrust his dream to them, which is just truly beautiful, and I love this. Also, I love that Luffy is asleep during this momentous moment, like he's almost always is during like these very like either momentous or serious moments. He's just always asleep and doesn't even know the sort of the gravity of what's happening. But they can't quite enjoy this joyous moment for too long, as it quickly cuts to Zoro in a panic, running back to everyone to warn them that the Marines have arrived to apprehend them. Or so we think, however. But in classic Zoro fashion, he gets lost multiple times and ends up on a random coast twice. And I love that intense danger music he's playing, but then cuts out anytime it cuts back to Zoro and then resumes midway through when it goes back to the Marines. I thought that joke was pretty funny. What's crazy, though, about this Marine ship is that it's a familiar one to us, but one we haven't seen in a very long time. That dog figurehead should make it pretty obvious, but the citizens quickly spell it out for us as well, that it is in fact Vice Admiral Garp, the same man that took Helmeppo and Kobe under his wing, which got me very excited because this might be our first opportunity to see them both in over 250 plus episodes, as well as maybe a reunion with Luffy and Zoro, which would be amazingly cool now that Luffy is sort of this big shot pirate and Kobe is firmly in the Marines now. And you all know how much I love Kobe, so the prospect of this got me really excited when I first read this and it was revealed that Garp was here. But that kind of pales in comparison to the information we get, about Garp. And there's a lot of exposition from the citizens that Garp is this legendary Marine hero that has gone toe-to-toe with Roger on several occasions, which is insane, as it makes you wonder, if he's that strong, why is he not an admiral? But also, he's gonna wipe the floor with a weekend and recovering Straw Hat crew, and so, especially with Zoro still lost all over the place, and yeah, it kind of creates this moment where you don't know what's gonna happen. But yeah, Oda has done it again. He just keeps finding interesting ways to keep ratcheting up the tension, as you have so many things going through your head that you want explained to you and to see happen. And I love these sort of post arc epilogue moments, because it's where we get the most world building and story progression. I mean, it's a literal gold mine of mind blowing reveals. Garp heads straight to the Galila company like he knows exactly where Luffy is. And then we see a light tease once he gets there, as Garp tells two officers to wait. And even though we don't get to see their faces, it's pretty clear that it's Helmeppo and Kobe, and they're both there. They're standing right behind him. I'm pretty excited at this moment. Garp walks over to the wall where Luffy is and smashes the wall in and tells him that there's someone he wants to meet, which you're assuming is Kobe and Helmeppo. But then he says something really interesting, like he has history with Luffy, which really starts to pique your interest as he says, hopeless as ever, and then leaps over to Luffy with what I think is Soru, completely bypassing Sanji, Chopper, and Frankie, who all couldn't even see or react to him in time. And one thing I have to point out is when it cuts to their reaction, the blank stare on Chopper's face is hilarious. Like, pause that moment and just stare at Chopper's face. It's pretty funny. He then lands a massive punch on Luffy's head, but like Sanji mentions, it's strange that it actually hurts Luffy as he just grabs his head and says, Ita! And since he's rubber, why would it hurt him? Then Garp says that there's no means to ward off a fist of love, which you're like, what? What kind of ability or technique is he using to actually hurt Luffy? Or is this sort of an instance of a comical gag, like with Nami being able to sort of bludgeon Luffy when she gets angry with him? But you feel like that's not the case. Otherwise, why would Oda write Sanji to say that specific line about how he shouldn't be hurt since he's rubber? So in universe, they acknowledge this oddity. Unfortunately, we don't really get an explanation for this, but it could just be a familial quirk, as we're about to find out something really shocking. He then finally takes off his dog mask, and Luffy is shocked to find that it's his grandpa sitting there. Like, what? Everyone, including us, the viewer, is shocked that this man is Luffy's grandpa. Like, oh my god. First off, it's something that had never even crossed my mind to even think about or wonder if Luffy had a grandpa. Sure, his parents are still, to this day a curious point, but never did I once think, yeah, I wonder what his grandpa or grandparents are like. But here we are infinitely intrigued now that we find out that this guy, who in total opposition to Luffy's pirate lifestyle, is a Marine Vice Admiral hero. The new questions that arise from this reveal are endless. And don't forget that this is the second instance since Buggy where a cover story has now come back to play a major role in the main story. And this is why I've made it a priority to cover each and every one, because many of them do add quite a bit to the story overall once they get told, and it's a really cool thing. However, these episodes end on that bombshell of a reveal, and we'll have to wait till the next podcast to learn more about Garp and hopefully see the reaction of the reunion between Helmeppo, Kobe, Luffy, and Zoro, in addition to seeing what Garp will do with Luffy. Will he and Kobe actually arrest Luffy? Who knows? But yeah, that's where we'll end this one. If you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment, and if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. Check out my Instagram and Twitter account at SunnyGo Podcast if you want updates of when I post new episodes or see some pictures of my manga collection. Check those out. And if you could, also, if you want to put any reviews up on your preferred podcasting platforms, that would be also pretty cool as well. Thank you. And as always, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to my podcast. Spoiler section, just a small one with a couple things that I wanted to talk about. Nothing too extensive since this episode is already running pretty long. But yeah, stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye. All right, so just a couple things I wanted to mention in this spoiler section, very short, since this episode is running pretty long. But yeah, I think one of the first things I wanted to mention is the fact that I completely forgot that this is kind of the first instance of the use of the Kuda burst for escaping on a ship, that the Sunny would eventually have it incorporated into its design and would become famous for in terms of how it actually gets out of places. And again, I still don't understand the physics behind what Frankie did with the Mary to use his own Kuda burst, but but yeah, I completely forgot that this is where sort of the inspiration came from. The other thing too is the thing about the Atom Tree, and one reason why it's pretty likely that this was inspired by the Adam and Eve story is that while this Atom Tree is called Adam, the other tree that we see later on in Fishman Island, the Eve Sunlight Tree, and so we have two of these very significant large trees called Adam and Eve, and so obviously that's a clear connection between the two and a reference to that story. And then finally, the last thing I kind of wanted to sort of mention really quickly is the love punch that Garp does. And at this point, it's pretty clear that Oda is slowly introducing Haki, because this is clearly Haki what's actually hurting Luffy, because we later find out the only way to hurt, devil fruit users through physical means is by infusing your body with Haki. And even though we don't see the black shading of the Busosho Haki or the armament Haki, it's pretty clear that that's the only way that the Garp is using to hurt Luffy through his rubber devil fruit. And so, yeah, it's interesting. This, up until now, you could kind of make the argument that, yeah, maybe Haki was something that Oda had sort of in a sort of a nebulous concept, whether it be mantra or whether it be the Conqueror's Haki from the very first time Shanks used it to scare away the Sea King. But those you could kind of maybe wave aside this to say that those are different abilities, but this is clearly Haki. Like the way it works, how it's used, and how it affects Luffy. It's clear that Garp is using Haki to punch Luffy, and so I think this is like definitively the first time we actually do see Haki as we know it in the main story, that we see it now, even though it doesn't have the black shading, which I guess, it's always been interesting because, obviously Oda, I don't know if it was a retcon or how it's always been that way, is that Haki's sort of always been there. And the only reason why it's sort of black in the post-time skip era is because that he wanted to make it sort of obvious when characters use Haki. And so the black shading is sort of more so for us, the audience, to see, and it's not really as apparent in to the characters in the story. And so, because we're not aware of Haki at that time, and we haven't been taught by Rayleigh, that we wouldn't be able to see even as the viewer, and so that's his sort of go-to. I mean, I'm perfectly fine with that. I actually prefer Haki not to have that black, because it looks kind of ridiculous to have all that black, the black limbs. Even though Gear 4th does look cool, I will say I love those sort of that flame pattern on Luffy when he goes into Gear 4th. But it's like, when you think about it, Luffy probably looks really weird from someone in universe, because those, like, the black outline on his eyes and the rest of his body aren't actually there. Like, I mean, I know there's like a Photoshop that someone did out there on the internet of Luffy without the black, and he does look really weird when he goes into Gear 4th. But anyways, there's a lot of weird nuances to that, which I won't get into, but it's always just been kind of a funny instance of that, and I like seeing that this moment was actually explained further down the line, because we don't actually get an explanation here as to why Garp was able to hurt Luffy, and we don't really put that 2 and 2 together until we're explained what Haki is. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the spoiler section. Thanks for listening, and I will catch you in the next episode. See ya.